This is a bit different for us. Last year I spoke here and it was from a banking perspective, it was an industry that you just couldn't get enough of. There's been a bit of a change in that year. The things I'm going to talk to you about today primarily are a couple of interesting topics really. Trump, he's a bit of an interesting fellow, and a little bit of a view on some aspects of China. I don't say that either of these topics I'll cover completely, but they're just a couple of insights that we're hearing from our customers. This is what my first slide looked like last year. It said really that the industry was very positive. Well, I think you could probably take the very off it now and just say it's positive. You take a slightly longer term view to things. It's still a very good industry. It's just had a bit of a glitch in the last 12 months. A lot of industries were experiencing growing pains. Well, there's some shrinking pains at the moment, but none of this is insurmountable. Look at all the other industries around in the primary sector have experienced similar issues. Dairy is probably the most evident in the recent times. Still, it's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about our mate, Mr. Trump. We'll start with him. From our point of view, we saw Trump and what he had promised to do in his election as being stimulatory to the US economy, and that stands for probably positives for most New Zealanders, especially from an exporter's perspective. He was promising tax cuts that would have left more money in the system. He promised higher spending. I don't know how he was going to pay for it, but he was promising that. That Make America Great Again, that's going to come at a cost. It was pulling industry and business back to America. That would put money in people's pockets. They would spend more. He had some controversial things like the TPP, moving out of that. I'll discuss that more in a minute, but yeah, that was something which also helped his cause. It was bringing work back to America. The wall, he probably regrets that, but once again it had a positive tone from where he was headed out at the time. And climate change, I'm not sure whether the view in America was positive for that or not, but it was one of his key planks. US-centric deals. This is the bit that when we look at the man, he's not that strategist. He's not that guy that, like Obama, like Clinton, like Bush, where they had a broad view of the world, they got consensus amongst their fellow leaders and moved on. Trump's very much this in with a deal, out with a deal, win, lose, and he targets little areas. So we're not really seeing anything which gives us an indication of, is this guy going to have a different sort of a policy? Is he going to start to think about things, or to just see what's in front of him and he reacts to it like he does with his tweets? So that'll be a watch this space, I think. What we have seen, though, is his election promises around things such as the Obamacare stumble the moment he's gone back into the regulatory world of the Senate, and he's really struggled to get consensus amongst specifically his own party. If you look at his business ethos and the way he has behaved with his businesses, he's hired his family, he's hired people who are yes people around him, and he's struggled to take the government of the US along for the journey about what he wants to achieve. So yeah, he's starting to get a little bit of momentum now, but he's had to compromise and he's had to learn how to think differently than the man that he's been to date. The wall, as I suggested, he probably regrets that. It's some gain. It sent a valuable message, I think, but at 30-odd billion to build it, it's, I don't know, we'll see where that one goes. But I suppose at the broad level, that lacking legislative support, that's really a man who rushes into things, doesn't take everybody along for the ride, and then wonders why it stumbles when he gets into the House. When you look at the climate change, that's been probably a bit of a disaster for the Republicans per se. If you look at corporate America, though, and you look at the way people report their balance sheets these days and the information they put in them, all of them have climate change in them. Corporate America is not going to turn off. They will get the voters leaving them if they don't stay on this path. So, albeit we're seeing a political shift away, you would wonder how much influence that's going to have in the broader corporate America. TPT, he promised to do it, so he did it. This TPP's a funny thing. It's not just a trade deal. It was so much more. It really was the way that the US was going to try and control Asia from a financial standpoint. They wanted to put stronger governance in place. It wanted to have redress if countries breached intellectual property rights, if they did dumped product on the US market. It was going to free up the US market for the Asian nations and ourselves, etc., to come into the US, but it also put a lot of compliance back on us and a lot of regulatory framework, which intimidated a lot of the people who were against it from the New Zealand perspective, and rightly so. This was a big brother from a legal perspective coming in and pushing a lot of influence on us or making us behave in a certain way. So I can see why that was a popular cause for those guys to move out of. In the long term, I think it's certainly going to take a lot of influence out of, away from America in Asia. So we'll have to just see how that goes. Trump the tweeter and Trump the disruptor. This is just someone we're not used to dealing with in this format. We're not used to a president or a major political leader in the world behaving like this. I think we just have to get used to it. He's not going to change. He's on the button every 5 minutes. So, I don't see much happening there. What we do see, though, is this isolationist stance that he's got. You know, we're going to do deals for America, and I'm going to, as I alluded to before, that deal-doing side of him is so prevalent, and all his approaches are win-lose. He's very little of his history says he's about that consensus sort of type thing. So with him putting up barriers, it's going to send a signal to the world, why don't you also put up barriers? Or it's okay to put up barriers. So it will be interesting to see how trade deals are negotiated going forward once we see the US start to move into some of their renegotiations. But the hardest bit of all for us is, because we think he's a bit of a strange man, Republican voter support. So the party that voted him in, the latest Gallup poll, I think within the last week to 2 weeks, 85% acceptance. They think he's doing the right thing. So all the bits that we're going, ooh, I don't like that, all the Americans who voted for him, yep, this is my boy. So they like what he's doing. So if you've got that sort of homegrown support, it's very unlikely that he's going to change. So Americans have got what they've got. They like the look of the man. A bit strange, really. If you ever get a chance to read a book called The Art of the Deal, there's a guy called Tony Schwartz was the ghostwriter. This is Donnie's book from 1987, and it's still very relevant. This is, to be honest, I didn't read the book. I read the précis, and I read what Tony Schwartz, his ghostwriter, wrote about it. So Tony obviously was very supportive of this book when it came out because he was earning revenue off it, but 20 plus years down the track, he's dead against Trump. He says he's a boy in a man's body. He throws tantrums, he only hires his family and very, very close people he can yell at and slap around because he is such a dominant figure. So, yeah, this man will be an interesting man to see in the world of in politics and in the way he shapes trade in the coming years. It's unfortunate that it's a little bit early in his career for him to really do some damage, but he's certainly knowing how to offend people. Well, even the G20, it's now the G19 plus America. So, you know, he is an isolationist. It'll be interesting to see. China's going to be a bit of a different story, I suppose. We see the modernization of China and the way that they've moved up the scale to sort of their middle class, their burgeoning middle class. They need what we've got, and increasingly so, to the stage that they will try and dominate what we have. And that's probably a risk, and I allude to it at the bottom, the concentration risk. They will, as time goes on, try and dominate more and more of our products because they need them, they like them. So we can see China becoming an increasingly important part of our business. China is also unlikely to restrict food imports. One of the things that they will do from time to time is stop it. We've seen them stop meat, various other products, just because they have internal issues or they have a political glitch somewhere or they have a scare about something, they just freeze the borders. That's something that China will continue to do. They will be very controlling of their economy and what comes in and out of their country. The positives are, for us, tourism. That's a big part of what the Chinese are now starting to offer us. But probably as equal importance, but possibly even more, capital flows. They are investing in New Zealand really strongly, and all of you may know that the banks in New Zealand, we can only grow from deposits these days. So your deposits. So you can't invest in the share market, you need to invest it with your bank, because for us to be able to grow, we've got to do it off deposits, and this is what the Reserve Bank is restricting us to do. We don't want to go back to that pre-GFC type situation where we had most of our funds borrowed from offshore. They're saying we want it safe, we want it domestically sourced. So this is the impacts that we're going to start running out of money unless all of us as New Zealanders start saving more. And in the meantime, we can use Chinese capital flow. So Chinese banks are coming in here, they're investing, they're wanting to put money into business. So the top end of town, the Fletchers, the Fonterras, they will start borrowing money from Chinese banks going forward as New Zealand banks start to run out of huff to be able to put in, $500 million. We'd rather invest it in the middle market, you sort of guys, rather than the top end of town, which we can allow the foreign banks to do. Primary sector exports is probably nothing that the Chinese don't want. They will continue to have an insatiable demand for what we've got. I suppose on the return side, manufactured goods, they're getting far better at the quality. We're getting cars of really good quality, etc., coming in now. So those manufactured goods, they've already moved up the scale from being the cheapest producer. That's gone off to Vietnam and Bangladesh and other places. But that concentration risk, I've got a customer who last year was 100% exporting into China. 15 years ago, he had over 50% of his exports into Europe and about, say, 30% into Australia. Yeah, as at last year, he was all China. Then China stopped buying what he had. He had $50 million worth of turnover. He sold nothing to China for 3 months. It just about killed his business. He's now spent the last just over 12 months re-establishing himself in other markets. He can't afford that concentration risk in his business again. So, albeit it might be quite attractive to have a single market and great penetration within that, I would urge people to consider the impacts of sticking with just one market. Is TPP going to be taken over by China? For the very reasons that America tried to do it with its legal frameworks and all those sorts of things, China doesn't want that. It wants to be able to dump stuff on the market. It wants to be able to copy goods if it feels like it. It wants to be able to put up a barrier if it needs to and not get sued by some large American corporate or some party within a TPP environment. So China's not ready for TPP. It will develop a whole lot of trade deals. It's got its Belt and Road Initiative globally, which is a different way of influencing trade flows. They will become increasingly dominant. It's a shame that the US has pulled back so that we don't have this tension and a bit of balance between the two of them. But China will be our dominant trading partner for the foreseeable future, and increasingly so. And they will start to probably at some stage wield a bit of a stick. The future. Yeah, uncertainty does abound, but let's face it, everything has uncertainty in it these days. It's just the new norm, isn't it? Whether it's the digital age coming on and it's going to get rid of all the manual work, or we're going to have robots, or we're going to have digitized banking and they won't have any staff. This is just the world. It's just happening. We just need to get used to it. But also, there's so many more opportunities. We do have a middle class in the world which is increasingly interested in what we produce, and I think the future, from a trade perspective, is going to be increasingly bright. Have a good conference.